Hello, and welcome to the Professional Pivot. I'm your host, Maggie Ruby, and I would like to thank you all for joining us. Today, we are very excited to bring you episode 2 of our 3-episode podcast series, which we are calling From Side Hustles to a Portfolio Career with Alex Randall Kittredge. As always, as we go through our episode, please add questions or comments. Your opinions matter to us, and we will include them in our future episodes. In our 3-part episode series, our first episode was focused on why the old career model no longer works. We unpacked the collapse of the traditional corporate career ladder, the emotional grief behind career dissatisfaction, and why career discomfort is not a personal failure, but a rational response to a very changing work world. So, in essence, episode 1 was about the why. And now, in today's episode, we will focus on the how of the career model, how to architect what comes next. In the event you missed episode 1, I would encourage you to take a listen. Once again, I am pleased to introduce our guest, Alex Randall Kittredge. As I shared with you last time, Alex is an entrepreneur, writer, career strategist, and a portfolio career leader. He has written a new book titled How Your Side Hustles Will Save You, Creating a Durable Career That Transcends the Corporate Ladder. Welcome again, Alex. We are delighted to have you back.
Thanks, Maggie. It's great to be back.
During our series, we are incorporating topics within Alex's new book, and today we will begin by focusing on designing your career like a system, not a job. So, to set the stage a little bit for this episode, we will be sharing themes around career strategy, identity, skills stacking, and have you start thinking like a career architect. So, here is some food for thought. If I ask you who you are professionally, most likely you would answer with your job title. If that is your answer, here is the problem with that. Job titles explain where you sit, not what you're capable of. And when your entire identity is built around a role, one reorg, one layoff, one leadership change can make your whole career feel unstable overnight. So today we want to break that pattern because clarity doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from building leverage. So with that said, let's get into it. All right, Alex, the show is yours. As we call this episode Designing Your Career Like a System, not a job, and when we talk about pivoting from job thinking to systems thinking, I understand you seem to always bring system thinking into your career coaching. Would you explain what that really means and why it is so important?
Sure. So, systems thinking is really like seeing your career as an interconnected set of components. So, it's the skills, it's the relationships, the income, your reputation, and your energy, as opposed to that single job title that you mentioned earlier. When one component changes, whether that's a layoff, a market shift, AI automation, a
Mm.
systems thinker adjusts the portfolio. A ladder thinker panics. The book's core architecture, I talk about the value creation grid, the energy versus income matrix, and having a career board of advisors. These are all systems tools, not job search tactics. So think of it like an engineer who's designing for resilience. You want redundancy, you want modularity, and you want adaptability. Basically, your career should have these same properties. In my own example, I started as an intelligence analyst, and that sort of shaped how I think about careers. It shaped that systems thinking approach.
No, it's really impressive and a great example, and a good segue to kind of elaborate a little bit further. Would you kind of expand on what is wrong with designing careers around job titles? Just tighten that up a little bit for us, if you would.
Yeah, so titles are inherently employer defined. first of all. They're not necessarily portable between companies, and
Yeah.
I would argue they're increasingly meaningless. So, they describe an organizational hierarchy, which you touched on. They don't describe the value that you create. I think, over since 2022, applications per role in an applicant sense have almost doubled. And that's partly because titles are so inflated, but it's also that nobody knows really what they mean anymore. So, what does that mean? Well, designing yourself around titles makes you a commodity. You're just like everyone else. You're competing with everyone who has the same title rather than being differentiated by your unique skills and abilities. Titles create ceiling effect. So we talked about this in episode 1 a little bit. You can only become a VP of marketing if you're a VP of marketing.
Right.
With companies that have that box, you fit that box. But you know, skills travel everywhere. And, we talked about this before, the difference between being a head of or an SVP. The market is moving towards skills-based hiring. And if you design your career around what you can do, not what you're called, I think you'll have a lot more success in this new economy.
No, I think that's really important in the skills based. It's interesting, as a search professional, the traditional search kind of old school search methodology was you identify target companies and then you identify titles and you kind of go up one rung and one down, down one rung. But it really was a lot of the research was done, to target potential candidates, passive candidates based on titles. And now the titles
Mm.
are so all over the place that it's become a whole different game in terms of identifying talent within organizations. And some organizations have hierarchy, and some organizations are very flat. So the world has changed dramatically in terms of trying to put a strategy around who you're going to go after in a particular company.
Well, I saw a role recently, Maggie, that said it was the organizational quarterback. And I think they meant chief of staff, but if you're the organizational quarterback, I don't know how many organizations have that if you're optimizing based on title.
Yeah, no. And I didn't play football, so it wouldn't be good for me, I guess. So earlier we were talking about the why and the how. So now about the how. How should professionals start thinking in a system mindset?
Yeah, well, step one is to audit your current portfolio. What are the ways that you create value inside an organization? Not just your job. This includes, volunteer work, consulting, teaching, maybe
Mhm.
content creation that you do on the side. Step two would be to map the dependencies between those different areas. So, how much of your income, your identity, and your growth depends
Mm,
on a single employer? If it's greater than 80%, that's a concentration risk. I think, the
mm,
third step would be to identify again those transferable skills. So using the value creation grid that I've created in the book, you can talk about what skills you have that are market values that aren't necessarily tied to one
yeah.
company. I talk about this in chapter 4, navigation skills comparison with that radar chart again. It helps you visualize where you're strong and where are your blind spots. You start small with one conversation, one experiment, maybe 1 hour a week, but directed toward that second mode of value creation, you have to start somewhere.
No, I think that's brilliant advice. And you've touched on this with just your own background. You really have such a broad background, broad expertise. In your opinion, what are the core components? So now we're breaking it down to kind of the component
Mm.
level of a career system.
Yeah, well, the first would be your skills portfolio. So it's both that deep area of expertise you have and that connective cross-functional skills that make you what's termed like a hybrid professional. It's your relationship network. So not just your contacts, but I talk about this in the book, having a career board of advisors. That
Mm,
strategic relationship that provides insight, that provides opportunity, and it provides accountability. I think the third would be your income architecture. So, some folks put this first. I'm saying you put it third. It's, multiple streams having maybe a primary salary, but also advisory or consulting work, some content or intellectual property, equity investments. And then the fourth would be your reputation infrastructure. So it's your public body of work, whether that's writing, speaking, your LinkedIn presence, a podcast appearance, or maybe client testimonials. I think if you're not already overwhelmed, the fifth would be your energy management, because that's a lot. It's your most overlooked component, but if your
Right.
system drains you, it's not sustainable, regardless of how much money you're making.
Well, and I guess one overarching kind of theme to all of that is if you're passionate about what you're doing, sometimes number five, the energy level, is
Mm,
easier because you're not thinking about it as a job function. It's just you're doing what you're passionate about, which I think is exciting in itself. So you're not just kind of pigeonholed into a job that you do every single day, which is terrific in and of itself. I want to go back to that board of advisories. I
mm.
like that. I think that is kind of fascinating. I'm kind of assuming, but I'd love confirmation that your board of advisory should be as diversified as your career portfolio is. So you're not just getting a lot of the same advice.
Definitely. I think, I talk about it in the book. There's four archetypes of the board advisor. I'm not going to give it away on this podcast. I'm going to make folks buy the book, but there's more to be said on that for sure.
Oh, I love it. Well, that's a teaser for sure. Okay, now let's talk about strategic identity, if we may. You talk about strategic identity. What does that really mean to you?
Yeah, well, strategic identity, it's a clear, compelling narrative about who you are and the value that you create. So it's bigger than any one single role. It's the answer to the question, so what do you do? And it doesn't start with a title, but it starts with your impact. So, an example would be, I'm not necessarily, or I'm not a VP of operations at XYZ Corp, but I help high growth companies build operational infrastructure to scale from 50 million to 500 million. That see the difference between those two? I think,
Yeah.
you know, in my own experience, I moved from Intel analyst to uh, chief of staff, working with technical founders, technical CEOs, PhD scientists. I found that was a great
I think that's
combination of
great.
my interpersonal skills and my technical knowledge. And it's very specific. It's a very niche topic, but it's become my own career sweet spot.
Well, and finding your sweet spot is terrific, and that's what makes you unique and a standout in a highly competitive marketplace. I like that starting with the impact, and then kind of working backwards in terms of explanation of that. I think that when you gave that example, it really made a dramatic shift in terms of the power of the statement you made.
Well, I
That
think
was really impressive.
it's a magnet for your opportunity. So when people understand your value clearly, they can refer you, hire you, invite you to apply. It's a much better way to be regarded.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. So, why do people feel trapped with labels? And I know we're getting stuck with titles and labels
Hmm.
and kind of categories, if you will, but trapped by labels. And what I mean by that is like, well, I'm a marketeer or I'm in HR. And it's kind of like a broad, just, bucket that people dump themselves into. And what's dangerous about that?
Yeah, well, I think, those labels are very reductive. They pigeonhole you into one area. They compress what is
Mm,
undoubtedly a complex array of skills into a single label. And, what labels create a cognitive anchoring. So they force you to
mm,
identify with one function or one role, both for others, but also for yourself. And, once you start identifying as, say, a marketer, you stop seeing opportunities in other spaces, and that's very dangerous. I think the job market reinforces this. You have, applicant tracker systems, recruiter searches, org charts. They all sort people into function, but breaking out of it feels like almost breaking the rules. I think,
yeah.
I talk about this in the book. There's an equity gap, certainly, in portfolio career access. Some folks have more social capital, more,
Mm,
financial capital, or also, more permission to reinvent themselves. I think, There's definitely a privileged dynamic there for certain folks, but the fix is really identifying the underlying capabilities that you have and,
Hmm.
you know, changing from, say, a marketer to a storyteller with data analytics and audience psychology. I think that travels between organizations, between departments, and between roles.
Do you know one thing that jumps out at me is, typically on a CV, the standard thing is there's a like a headline news of what you say, I'm a, global executive something or other. And that seems like that would be a great place to kind of put in, like, switch out and not call yourself a, executive search professional, for example, but then to break it down into more of the impact than a label. And that seems like, I don't know why I just jumped to the top of a resume, because everybody does it. And I know you customize it based on the opportunity you're pursuing, but I still think that that could be completely reworked based on your ideology on that.
Well, I think to your point earlier, it scales up and it scales down. So it's very limiting to be one thing.
Yeah,
If the company you're applying to doesn't have that one thing, well, you're tossed in the trash. But if you talk about
yeah.
what you do, I think folks can almost visualize that. Oh, we could use that here. We could use those
Hmm.
skills and those experiences to help us do what we do.
Yeah, it breaks the boundaries. So here's a big one, in my opinion. How do you shift from identity as a title to identity as a value?
Yeah, well, I think you start by listing every skill and every outcome that you've ever delivered. And this is tough. It takes a lot of time. I'm not talking about job duties, I'm talking about actual results. So, most people have at least 3 to 4 more capabilities than their title suggests. If you use what I term the value creation grid in the book, you can map your skills against market demand. And, where do you have those high value, rare skills combinations? Once you identify that, you start to build your value narrative in low stakes settings, at networking events, with LinkedIn posts, conversations with trusted friends, that career board of advisors that we talked about. Iterate on it. You have to say it
Yeah,
out loud to start believing it. And, stop introducing yourself by your title. Start introducing yourself again by those problems you solve and the people you solve them for. I think, in my own journey, I previously, at the beginning of my career, so identified with the institutions that I was a part of or that I worked for. And
yeah,
part of,
yeah,
I think, maturing in your career or also becoming more independent in this portfolio career mindset is to start to build your own career identity. And, I think, not to go too off tangent here, but this portfolio career model, more and more folks are incorporating themselves as an LLC, a limited liability company, or a corporation of one. And I think that's this move that we're seeing. It plays very much into the portfolio career.
I like that. And I think there was a moment in time where everybody was talking about what is your personal brand. And
Mm.
I mean, this kind of packages up and almost like, with an LLC. I think that's genius. I really do. Um, I'm starting to picture your book that I own, and and it's like it's going to have dog ears, and it's going to have post-it notes and stickies and notes, everything that you talk about in this chapter and that chapter. So I think it's going to be a well-loved book that I have a chance to go through when I buy yours. So I'm very excited about it. What questions would somebody ask to redefine themselves, in a broader picture? Because we're not now talking about listing the skills.
Yeah, well, I think there's 3 principal questions. The first would be, what types of problems or what types of people come to me to ask for help? This really reveals what your
Mm,
natural strengths are and what you might undervalue in your own skills portfolio. The second would be, what problems can I solve that most people in my field can't? This identifies your unfair advantage or your unique combination of skills. The third would be, what work makes me lose track of time? You always hear about this deep flow state, but that energy alignment is the best indicator
yeah.
of the sustainable direction of your career.
And you've mentioned this, and I think those are three great pieces of advice. I think you've mentioned this a couple of times, talking about storytelling. So, how does storytelling influence opportunity?
Yeah, well, I think it's wholly dependent on storytelling in this economy. Opportunities flow to people who are visible and legible. If people can't quickly understand what you do and why, they can't refer you. So the best career stories follow from a structure of, say, I saw this problem, I developed this perspective, I built skills to solve it, and here's the proof. I think, storytelling isn't necessarily self promotion, it's communicating your value. And in this day and age, it really makes folks able to connect you to the right opportunities. In my own work, I do public writing. I appeared on a Wall Street Journal podcast recently. I had the ARC Strategy newsletter on Substack, and this new book. They create opportunities in a noisy market, and they build that
Yeah.
competitive advantage. The person with the clearest story nowadays is the one who wins, not the person necessarily with the best resume.
Boy, that really resonates. And congratulations, by the way, on everything that you just mentioned that you've been doing. And I'm a huge fan of your Substack. I think that everything that you bring up and the topics are so pertinent that it's almost like I read them the headline, and it's like, oh my God, he's going to talk about everything that I've wanted to ask but I haven't asked yet. So you do a brilliant job with that. So my compliments. One other question is, so we talk about storytelling. It's very apparent that LinkedIn seems to have shifted its functionality a little bit, as opposed to just being a resume platform to really being a narrative platform now. Can you talk a little bit about that, and how I mean, in kind of a Reader's Digest version, how can people use that to their advantage?
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head. LinkedIn has definitely moved from what was a resume platform to one that is more, you know, publishing, and reputation building. Content creators on LinkedIn get much more opportunity than those who are passive observers. I think, the algorithm, if anyone knows what it does, and I don't think anyone does, it tends to reward having a point of view on some content, not just a job announcement, but maybe a framework, an insight, a professional narrative. And so for portfolio career builders, LinkedIn is the storefront. It's where I don't know, for lack of a better word, sell your wares. It's what you say
Yeah.
you can do, and you demonstrate that. It's where potential clients or collaborators find you. And 79% of hiring managers nowadays rely on freelancers in some form or another. We talked about this earlier for that project-based
Hmm.
work that's more ad hoc than, say, a full-time role. Um, Many of them are sourcing directly from LinkedIn and from their networks. So if you post consistently in your area of expertise, maybe one thoughtful post per week or every other week, it really builds more career capital than sending out 100 job applications.
Boy, that makes a lot of sense. And I think one thing that's interesting is, I think the way people write their CVs and resumes now are so important, because I had an individual come, and I was, providing some advice, and they were saying, they were posting on all these jobs, and before the job, the application itself, the online application, whatever job board that they happen to be on, would take their resume and then parse it.
Hmm.
And then most of the time they'd have to go back and kind of manually edit it. And they said now what they're seeing is that the resumes are just being attached. So from what I'm understanding is that now AI is really interpreting the resume and reading it as a story, as opposed to it being more keyword searches and breaking down the components of the resume. So storytelling, it seems like, and branding and being able to position yourself much more diversified than ever is going to be critical for success right now. It's just shifting so quickly.
100%.
So, if we may, can we shift a little bit to skill stacking and optionality? And you've mentioned both of those in your in some of your descriptives so far. So, portfolio careers, which is my favorite concept. What skills compound best in a portfolio career?
Yeah, well, I'm a little biased, but I think writing is first and foremost potentially your biggest source of leverage. It scales infinitely, it builds your reputation, and it demonstrates your thinking quality. I think second would be, data or AI fluency. We spoke about this earlier, but
Mm.
54% of freelancers have AI fluency compared to, say, 38% of full-time employees. That gap is the opportunity. And thirdly, sales and persuasion. Every portfolio career requires selling ideas. It requires marketing yourself, and it's unavoidable and under leveraged.
So, how, kind of in that same vein, why are hybrid professionals, and when I say hybrid professionals, I'm not talking about hybrid work schedules, but hybrid professionals becoming more valuable?
Yeah, well, I think, most of the value these days sits and the problems sit at the intersection of different disciplines. So, pure specialists are being commoditized by artificial intelligence. It's
Hmm.
those hybrid professionals who combine two or three more areas of expertise in a rare configuration who are thriving in this environment. An example might be someone with a finance background and a data science background, or someone with a, say, marketing and an engineering background. That would be very sought after, or a strategy background and maybe a design background. That these uncommon juxtapositions of skills are in high demand. So, these intersection professionals are dramatically harder to replace if they were to leave. And,
Right.
you know, I think to go back to that point earlier, 45% of high growth companies are using freelancers. So there are these opportunities, and I think they're going under the radar for folks because they're just not legible. They're not intelligible.
Hmm.
Folks aren't taught to recognize that these opportunities exist. I talk about the navigation skills comparison. It's in a radar chart. The most resilient professionals are somewhat balanced. They have a multi-dimensional skills profile.
Hmm. And must be much more fascinating to talk to for sure. Um, So, and you said unfair advantages before. So I want to kind of pick up on that a little bit. And what does that mean? And how do people identify with them, like with unfair advantages? I find that a very interesting kind of catchphrase.
Yeah, well, I think your unfair advantage is the unique combination of skills, experiences, and perspectives that are entirely yours. They're nearly
Mm,
impossible to replicate. So they often come from unusual or nonlinear career paths. In
okay.
my experience, it's having that intelligence analyst to finance trajectory. It's quite uncommon, and it creates a lens for, a long-term career that a long-term career banker or someone who's only been in finance simply doesn't have. They can't replicate it. I think, how to find them. You look at those intersectionalities, those we talked about most recently. What two or three things do you combine that very few other people do? And, most people discount their unfair advantage because they think it's so obvious to them, but it's not obvious to other people.
Well, that's a really good point, and certainly a huge advantage. What would you say is the difference between learning randomly? I mean, we're talking about so many pockets and everything that we're doing. So learning randomly versus learning strategically.
Yeah, well, I think random learning would be just taking courses because they're interesting or collecting a stable of
Uh,
credentials, chasing every new platform. It feels productive, but it doesn't necessarily compound. Strategic learning, it's investing in skills that strengthen what your unique combination is. So it increases the value of your existing portfolio and builds further leverage for you. I think if you can ask this question before you embark on any skill journey, it would be, does this enhance my portfolio or does it
mhm.
start a completely new thread? And if you think of it like a decision tree,
Yeah,
as you get farther out, you close off different branches.
yeah. or they break off altogether.
Exactly.
um, so I mean, there's so much when you talk about just expanding your knowledge base and being able to make yourself unique because you bring all these different skill sets. So I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, okay, in order to get this meaningful career and to be able to leverage it, how long does this really take to build more of a robust career portfolio?
Yeah, well, I think it takes longer than people would like. Certainly, in my own experience, it takes about 12 to 18 months of consistent effort. So that builds the foundation. And then after maybe about 3.5 years of compounding, you have a stable foundation. It's definitely a marathon. It's not a sprint. And you know, the the first 90 days, however, are where you get that strategic clarity. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need to start iterating. You need to start doing. And I think I talk about this. There's a whole chapter in the book on rethinking the timeline of work, but certainly, we overestimate what we can do in a month and we underestimate what we can do in 3 years. It's changing the timeline that you're looking at. The portfolio career doesn't replace your salary overnight, but over time, it's a parallel build that eventually creates enough optionality to
Mm.
to make the primary source of income a choice and not a dependency.
Well, and I like kind of the building stack approach too, and that certainly the payoff down the road is so worthwhile being patient and building it properly. I think that's terrific. I kind of one last category in this episode that I'd like to touch on, and it relates to coaching because I know that that is part of your career portfolio, as
Mm.
you're a brilliant coach. So, what I'd like to do is throw out to you a scenario and see and share with I would like to ask you how you would handle this particular scenario as a coach. I think that would be helpful to kind of see it maybe just in action a little bit. So, say you have you're talking to coaching
Mm.
a mid-career professional in an operations role. This person really has lost their excitement about their role and truly is burned out by the proper definition of burnout. Um, really wants flexibility, but makes a good salary and is very fearful of instability. So, how would you coach this person? Where would you start? What would you recommend that they not do? Because I think sometimes it's easy to say what to possibly do, but what should they avoid doing?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, I would validate the fear. Having those financial obligations, that's real. No one should quit a salary without having a plan in place. The portfolio approach is designed specifically for this. So you build alongside instead of.
Mm,
I think I would encourage them to apply the energy versus income matrix. Map everything out in your current role on those two axes. What drains you but pays you well? What energizes you that you're not being paid for? And start with a 10% experiment, something on the side that maybe 4 hours a week that can start to build that muscle. I would also encourage, going back to that career board of advisors, the 3 to 5 people who've made similar transitions, their perspective is worth more than any course or credential.
I think that's terrific. I think not only is your book going to be a New York Best Time seller, but I also think that you need to like start planning a little bit more for your coaching, that portion of your portfolio, because I think a lot of people are going to start calling you and say, "Hey, I read your book and could I get some personal coaching?" I just foresee that in your future.
The book
um,
scales, I don't.
I love that. So this has all been great. And as we wrap up, I actually have two more questions for you that I'd
Sure.
like to get your thoughts on. The first one is why does clarity follow action and not the other way around?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, it's because you can't think your way to a new identity. So
Mm,
you have to act your way into it. Clarity is a byproduct of experimentation. It's not a prerequisite. Most people wait for the perfect idea before starting, but meanwhile, folks that started already with an imperfect idea six
mm,
months ago, they've iterated to something that works for them now. Every successful portfolio career person will tell you the thing they're doing now wasn't the thing they started with, and that comes from
interesting.
doing it.
what I think you and we were at lunch at one point. I think, how do you get to Carnegie Hall?
You practice, practice, practice.
I think that applies here for sure. Um, as always, you are brilliant. And I want to thank you very much. And I'm sure everyone is looking forward to the third episode in our three-part series, From Side Hustles to a Portfolio Career with You. I certainly know I am. And for everybody that's listening, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Until next time.